And joining us right now, the Rothman Orthopedics guest line from Bleeding Green Nation, Brandon Lee Gowton. What's going on there, BLG?
Happy to be here, Mark.
I want to get so many different people's take on this because I still have yet to figure out how this all went down. Did the Eagles really try to get Chauncey Gardner-Johnson to re-sign here in Philadelphia? And if so, was it as hogwash a contract with $17 million backloaded, whatever? Did they really make a valiant effort to try to bring him back?
I think they definitely made an effort. Clearly not as strong as they could have. You know, there was some buzz out there that they might tag him. That clearly didn't happen. And the contract he got wasn't even anywhere close to what the tag would have been, I believe, double digit there. Like we're talking about 10 million above. I think they valued him to an extent, but first of all, the contract that was rumored out there, or not even rumored, put out there by his agency, I just don't think that's an actual, from what people who are smarter than me know when it comes to the cap specifically, have basically said that's not a real structure of a contract that would be like permitted by the NFL. So I don't know exactly what that was about. It seemed like that was more talking about cap space, which doesn't really matter in terms of the player gets paid differently, than how the cap space is structured out. It's more of a team thing, not a player thing to be concerned about. Look, I think they tried, but I think it was clearly at a point where Chauncey Gardner-Johnson valued himself more highly than he realistically should have, because I don't think you can say that taking a 1-year deal with the Detroit Lions for $8 million is really the best deal he could have gotten. And I don't see how he's going to go to free agency next offseason and expect to get paid more than when he came off a year where he led the NFL in interceptions and played for a Super Bowl team.
So what do you think the Eagles were willing to go to in terms of that number? Nowhere near Jesse Bates money, obviously, but where do you think they were willing to negotiate there with him?
Yeah, I think one of Howie Roseman's undoubted strengths is having a sense of what the market is. I don't think you've seen the Eagles egregiously overpay players to that extent, like you just mentioned, Jesse Bates. And I think Howie clearly read that there wasn't this super lucrative safety market out there. So I think they had a number. $8 million has been thrown out there. I think something like that would be reasonable. I don't think they were looking at CJ Gardner-Johnson and saying, "Hey, this is an elite player. We have to keep him no matter what the cost." I can't fault them for that. I don't think he was the kind of player you hand a blank check to. And again, the market has said that is the correct read on the situation. But it's just unfortunate that they couldn't keep him. And they're certainly a worse team without him, because you're just looking at Reed Blankenship and whoever else starting at safety right now. But, it's a long offseason and they still have some options available.
Last thing on him, and it also crosses way here with Fletcher Cox. The only thing that seems odd to me is $10 million for Fletcher Cox, but not willing to go $8 million for Chauncey Gardner-Johnson for CD Deuce. Does that pass your smell test?
I mean, it's a little different, you know what I mean? Because, first of all, I don't love the Cox contract, to be clear. So I'm not going to defend that part. Yeah. I'm not going to say that was an awesome move because I think the way I put it was like, what impact play do you even remember off the top of your head Fletcher Cox really making last year? And I don't think you can think of too many. Maybe you can come up with one. Can you come up with two? I don't think so, without really looking back at it. And even then, so I can't really defend that part of it. I get it, but it's not that simple. Because they had to do something at defensive tackle, clearly, where they had nothing there, and now you can say, okay, well, they have to do something at safety, and that's true. But they might have liked their options better at safety here. There's some starting caliber players out there as opposed to defensive tackle, which I think that market was kind of the talent in that pool there was thinning out a bit more.
So Justin Evans, who they brought in, a safety, obviously, you're not looking at him as a guy that the Eagles are looking at to be a starter here.
I think that's kind of like the Andrew Adams signing from, 2021, where you bring him in, you see if he can kind of compete for a job. Why not? You need more bodies at that position, because right now, again, it's Reed Blankenship, it's Kayvon Wallace, it's Andre Chachere, and now you're adding Justin Evans into the mix there. So they simply just needed more bodies, and that's a guy who has some experience. He can compete for a roster spot. But yeah, it sounds like, the team made it very well known, or at least what I presume to be the team made it very well known that they are not done adding at that position.
Certainly, and make sure everyone is following Brandon Lee Gowton on Twitter, and make sure you guys are checking out his latest article about, at the time we tape this, at about 4:30 on Tuesday afternoon, the Eagles' latest signing, which is Nicholas Morrow, comes over here by way of the Bears, was a starter last year, so check out this article. Where do you see him playing on this defense for Sean Desai?
Yeah, he's versatile. He's experienced. He's played at multiple linebacker spots, so we'll see where they feel most comfortable playing him. I think this is a reasonable signing. The fact that the terms weren't leaked out as of when we're recording this, I think kind of speaks to he probably didn't cost a ton. He's stayed pretty healthy in his career outside of the 1 year he missed due to an ankle injury. So, I think it's a reasonable stopgap kind of option. The Eagles needed to sign a linebacker because they lost TJ Edwards and Kaiser White. Is this someone to get super excited about? No, it's not. But again, you can't have a roster entirely comprised of Pro Bowlers, especially when there's a salary cap. So they had to get someone in here who fills a hole. They can still attack this position in the draft. But clearly, they're just not going to spend significant resources at linebacker. It's just not what they do. And to be fair, that hasn't really worked out for them in the past with some of the guys they've signed: Zach Brown, Eric Wilson, LJ Fort was in there, Corey Nelson. So they're going to hope that Nicholas Morrow is more of the Kaiser White mold than those guys.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to the linebacker position, is this the year that we see Nakobe Dean step forward and be a starter? What does this signing mean for him, if anything?
It really needs to be because, they're relying on some of these guys like Nakobe Dean, Reed Blankenship, Jordan Davis, these members of the 2022 draft class who were certainly heralded. And look, I think Nakobe Dean has an intriguing future here in Philadelphia. At the same time, these guys that walked in free agency, TJ Edwards, Kaiser White, a lot of people might say, well, it's okay to let them walk. Well, those were the guys who were playing over Nakobe Dean last year, so he really needs to elevate his game. I thought he kind of had a suspiciously kind of quiet training camp, but then showed some more promise in the actual game action when we saw him in the preseason games, and then a little bit at some of the end of the blowouts that the Eagles had in 2022. So I'm intrigued by him, but there's a lot to prove.
What do you know about Sean Desai and his defense and what he plans on bringing here to Philadelphia?
I think one of the most interesting things about him is that he's worked with with a lot of different defensive minds, especially all the time he was there in Chicago with multiple head coaches. You're talking about, Mel Tucker and Vic Fangio and Chuck Pagano, all these different kind of system schemes, personalities, preferences. So I think that's kind of interesting, having seen some things maybe that he really liked that worked a lot. Pete Carroll, obviously I should throw it in there, coming from the Seahawks. So I think being around those guys has some value, and you can kind of take the good things you saw, what you liked about that in here. Now, he only has 1 year of defensive coordinator experience, and that coming with the Bears. So that's something that I think it remains to be seen, how comfortable he is calling a defense and everything. At the same time, Jonathan Gannon had only done that 1 year before coming to Philly. So experience isn't everything, but it's an intriguing hire. You have to consider too, the Eagles couldn't necessarily get the best candidate in theory just because of the timing of, having to do a coaching search right after the Super Bowl. So I think they kind of did the best of what was available.
Do you agree with the philosophy that's come out with the Eagles loved what Jonathan Gannon did so much? Well, first, reports about him possibly getting head coaching money just to stay or to be a DC. Do you think that the Eagles are just going to stay along that path and be the same type of defense schematically?
To some extent, not fully. I think, if they really wanted an exact replica, they could have promoted Denard Wilson to defensive coordinator. And it was kind of my understanding that they had a level of comfort doing that if they had lost Jonathan Gannon after the 2021 season, when there was, a bunch of teams interviewing him then, and there was thought that he might get the Texans job at that time. Didn't work out. They had a level of comfort with promoting Denard Wilson, I believe, at that time. Now, a year later, Denard Wilson doesn't return. So that's kind of an interesting development at that point in time. But I think there are some things when you consider how analytically inclined the Eagles organization is, and how we clearly, I think, see influence from above the head coach on the coaching staff. I think that's a factor in there. But obviously, there's going to be different players. Sean Desai is going to have his own ideas of how to do things. So, I think there's going to be some kind of, core principles retained, but obviously everyone's going to have their own spin on it.
We still got the draft ahead of us here, and don't feel the need to go to a letter grade unless you feel the need to go to a letter grade. But how are we doing so far? How is Howie Rose been doing in this offseason when it comes to prepping the Birds for hopefully another Super Bowl run at least?
Yeah, I think when it comes to grading, you kind of have to measure things up against expectation. And the reality is the Eagles weren't going to keep the entire team. That was not an option to them. It was running the whole team back and keeping everyone. If there was no salary cap, they could have done that, and that would have been great. But that was never going to be the case. And I think making a of what they have, what they've been able to do with, that being in mind, they were going to lose coaches, they're going to lose players. I think they've done reasonably well. It's not like they've gone out there and added, star players to the roster, but that's in part because they already have a lot of those guys, especially on offense. And I think, the fact that you're retaining so much of an elite offense from last year. Now, obviously, you lose Isaac Samalo, but hey, you have Cam Jurgens, your second-round pick from last year, who showed promise stepping up into that position at right guard. So, I think that's the big deal. Look, the defense is going to take a hit. You lose Javon Hargrave, you lose Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. Those losses can't just be, hand-waved away. But again, there was always going to be some kind of regression. You're always going to lose something. I think it's been a reasonably good offseason for the most part. I'm willing to give them like a B+.
Is it easy? Is it just easy? Is it this easy, Brandon, to look at the offseason and say that the guy that they'll miss the most is Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, or is there somebody else you think they'll miss more?
I think it's Hargrave. I think pass rush is so valuable. And look, CJ made a lot of great plays last year. I think some of those, just watching some of those highlights recently from last year, were tip passes, and credit to him for making the play on the ball. But my point there is to say there was always going to be some level of regression. He wasn't going to lead the NFL in interceptions probably for 2 straight seasons. I think he's a good player. He will probably have 2 or 3 in Detroit because, again, he finds a way to get his hands on the ball. But I don't think you're going to get that kind of level, that 99 percentile level of performance from CJ once again. So there was always going to be some drop off there. But I think Hargrave, missing him in the middle, he's just such a unique interior defender. I don't know how many guys are able to generate pass rush from the inside like he is. So I think that's the bigger loss.
I think you're legally obligated to use the word potential when talking about Rashad Penny and the phrase if he stays healthy. But let's use those 2 terms. There they were. Is he going to be an impactful player if he does stay healthy, all the potential, all that stuff? Will he be the most impactful non-drafted player coming in here as of yet?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. He has the potential to be. I wouldn't even say like if he's going to get hurt. I mean, I think it's just going to happen. Like that's the expectation, and I certainly don't wish that on him. But there's just no way you can go into this season like planning for it not to happen. Just based again on his history. Now, maybe you can point to the fact the Eagles have done a better job, especially more so recently, keeping their guys healthy. So maybe, you have some optimism in that regard, but still, this is a guy who he's not going to be available probably, especially if you're going deep into a playoffs. We're talking about get to the Super Bowl, 20 games in the season. He's probably not going to be available for all 20. You kind of hope he's available for the most important ones down the stretch and can make a big impact there. I think he did great things with the Seahawks in terms of his efficiency numbers. Now you put him in a spot where, the quarterback is even more of a threat as a mobile threat and helps his backfield options. You put him behind this offensive line, best run blocking offensive line in the NFL. I think he could be, again, I don't think it's crazy to say he has like reasonably the best player at his position in the league kind of upside.
Okay. We're playing Madden now. All right. We're playing Madden. Injuries are off. Who's your number 1 running back? Is it Kenny Gainwell or is it Rashad Penny?
It's Rashad Penny. Again, I think Gainwell did some nice things down the stretch in the playoffs, but you look at a guy at his frame, he's smaller, he's lighter. I just don't think that's a guy who's going to be able to handle 20 carries per game, especially if we're talking about injuries off in theory.
Right.
Penny has the physique of a guy, I think, who can handle that, although he hasn't to this point. Whereas Gainwell, I think he's, more of a complementary player.
I know people were making the joke, like, did we sign a linebacker? This guy looks like a linebacker, that joke. And I'm like, this guy looks like a defensive tackle. Like, this guy is just ginormous. To let people behind the curtain for a second here, Brandon, how it works is in the YouTube stratosphere or the comment section, I do a little comment, a chat check on my show. I do it live, and then I pretty much don't look at the comments. But every once in a while on my phone, I'll get a comment that pops up in my YouTube Studio app, right? And it'll be like an angry comment about how I doubted Jalen Hurts, how I hated Jalen Hurts, how I said Jalen Hurts sucks. And I'll click on it and I'll be like, oh no, they're talking about Brandon's interview from when we were still in the stratosphere of, is Jalen Hurts the guy? So you were one of the few that said openly, I don't think he's the guy. You owned it, you wrote about it, and that's fine. Season later, MVP candidate in the Super Bowl. We've all been wrong. What do you think about Jalen Hurts now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I don't regret is thinking that like the kind of leap that he could potentially, what I said at the time was like he needs to make a huge leap to go from where he was last year, and or meaning 2021, to kind of being what a lot of people described as a potential hopeful Josh Allen cut. Like that was a big jump to make. And I have to say, I feel like even the people who believed in him most, I feel like he had to even surpass those expectations reasonably. I don't know how too many people were saying, "Oh, he's definitely going to be the MVP of the league." Had he not get hurt at the end in 2022. So I think he was even better than even most optimistic people could have said. So in a way, I'm saying we're all wrong, but obviously I was more wrong than others. And what I do regret, what I say, I will kind of look back and kind of think about moving forward is just how much I kind of underrated things like leadership, and then just his pure will to win, which Nick Sirianni has compared to like Michael Jordan. I think in a lot of cases that stuff can be overrated, because if you can't play and you have all those things, I don't really know where that really takes you in the end. But if you combine the talent with what he's able to do, and I think again it speaks to how special what he did last year. It was not to be as easily expected as what happened. He's clearly blown my expectations out of the water, and I fully believe I have a tremendous amount of confidence in him moving forward.
I'm going to take that move that you just pulled right there. That's a brilliant move. Oh yeah, well, you weren't optimistic enough about how good he
That's
could
right.
That's a brilliant move. I'm going to steal that from you. I'll credit you, but I'm going to steal it. And then finally, last thing, are the Sixers finally getting out of the second round? Is it going to happen this year, BLG?
I mean, no one at all is allowed to even say that, because there's just no good reason to. The Sixers deserve no benefit of the doubt in that regard. Now, that being said, prior to last night, especially, with the loss to the Bulls, which, I don't think is setting the panic alarm, but I do think that the vibe is changing a little bit here, and we'll see how they finish down the stretch. But I think it's like almost a willing to allow yourself to maybe think they can finally do that. But again, it's like you can't. It's fool me a third time. Like you have to see it to actually believe it. But I really like the way they're trending at this point, is what I'll say.
I am with you 1,000%. At the time we air this tonight, they beat the Bulls in Chicago, and they go on that nice little trip, and they make us all feel warm and fuzzy again. His name is Brandon Lee Gowton. You know him. You love him. Subscribe, follow, read, all that great stuff from Bleeding Green Nation. Brandon Lee Gowton. BLG, thank you so much, brother. Great talking to you as always.